thank you very much for inviting me to speak, and thank you for Polly for doing the opening. I think you'll find there's a few things I'm going to talk about that pick up on a number of things that Polly's just talked about. And also, can I just apologise in advance? I think hopefully you will all get the slides. I think that's probably the plan. And I've got lots of website links in my slides that would hopefully provide some of the resources that I'm going to talk about. And also, when I was doing my PowerPoint, I've been working on everything at about that size. So I'm now terrified that on this massive screen, everything's going to look out of focus or really weird. So my apologies, it's the first time I've done a presentation at this scale for about 2 years. As Chris said, I'm Drew Bennelick, I'm a landscape architect. I work for the Heritage Fund, or the National Lottery Heritage Fund, and I lead all of our work across the UK in relation to landscapes and nature, of which parks is obviously a part of that. And as a lottery distributor, we distribute money raised through the National Lottery, so tickets sold by Camelot. And annually, we have a budget at the Heritage Fund of around £320 to £380 million a year, of which somewhere between 60 and 80 million goes towards land and nature projects. And bear in mind that's across the UK, although it's done on a formula, so obviously the majority of that money comes to England. And the National Lottery was set up to fund additionality. So we're not there to fund things that government should be doing. We're not there to fund revenue. We're very precisely set up to fund projects that have a start and an end, which is why a lot of you will have had conversations, I'm sure, in the past about what a project might be. Looking at things I'm going to talk about, I'm going to talk about parks and what we mean by heritage, and the fact we've been investing in parks for actually it's 25 years, I think. I'm going to talk about austerity and opportunity. I'm going to talk about drivers for change. I'm going to talk about our kind of view of the future. And as an organisation, we've got a brand new chair and we're about to get a brand new chief executive. So I suspect we'll be going through some changes again in the future. What do we mean by heritage? A bit out of focus, not too bad. So I think when we started 25 years ago, we kind of got known for investing in bandstands, in park avenues and in the typical heritage of parks. And that has considerably broadened over the years. So now when we talk about heritage, we talk about cultural heritage, the built features, the designs of these spaces, but we also talk about natural heritage, so nature and biodiversity, and we also talk about the social heritage of parks, which personally I think is probably one of the more important areas. Parks have been famous for years as places of protest, places of meeting, places of recreation, and all of those are a vital part of the heritage of a park. I don't really need to say too much about all the brilliant projects that we funded. We're sat in one. There's lots here that we funded. Ian has been recently working on those case studies that I think Liz mentioned at the start. Those have been published, and a lot of those projects are all funded by the Heritage Fund. And I was going to say it because I thought he was going to be here. Paul Rabbits has written a really good book, which you can get on Amazon, which tells you the story of history of parks, but it also tells you the story of Heritage Fund investment in parks as well. So it's largely thanks to lottery players, but also local authorities, park staff, volunteers, communities, friends groups. And just think 25 years ago, I think there were probably less than 100 friends groups, and there are now over 5,000 friends groups. And a lot of that work has been driven through all of this investment in parks. And parks, and I'm going to use the word parks, but actually when I talk about parks, I'm talking about all urban green space, is vital in bringing people together. And I think that's something that at Heritage Fund we've really seen develop over the life of the Heritage Programme. And we used to, until 2018, have a targeted programme for investment in parks called Parks for People. That stopped because we had a redesign of our programmes and we rationalised to just reduce down to some open programmes, and I'll talk more about that in a moment. But also the demise of cave space, I think that's already been mentioned, that has had a significant impact on our work and on the work of the sector. And I think to a degree, Heritage Fund has picked up some of that cave space work, but without any of the resource to do it. And I think that's one of our problems, is trying to find those people who are in a position to act as advocates or champions for public parks. Without that cave space support, we've ended up doing some of these reports, and all of you in the room, I'm sure, contributed to the 2 State of Parks reports. We've also done work on natural capital in London that we funded, and more recently we did an evaluation of our Parks for People programme and published Space to Thrive, which was a gathering together of the massive amount of evidence on the social benefits of parks. And we've just recently published another one on why invest in parks as well. So we've been doing kind of legwork really to kind of help the sector to make the case. But as you know, we've been suffering these problems. Parks close, which is a park that closed due to a lack of staff to actually man this part of the site. And funding has been a real problem in trying to keep projects on the road. But our view is that we had a parks programme that invested in, if you like, single flagship parks. And what we were seeing was that we were often, and I put it the other day to someone, we were building a really nice conservatory on the side of a house that had fallen down. There was one park I visited, not in this region, where we'd funded a fantastic park recreation, a park manager and a ranger, but they were the only park manager and the only ranger in an entire city. So our concern was we were putting all our money into single sites, and that actually it was the wider green space networks that were really suffering. And what people told us in our consultations was that it was parks and green spaces next to where people live that was actually really important to people. So yes, the big flagship parks are important, but it's actually all green space within a space that's important. So we kind of shifted our focus a little bit, and we started to look at how we could help parks more widely in places. And we ran a program called Rethinking Parks, and one of the projects that we worked on was about energy. And there's a couple of links that you can follow up later, but this was about how parks could actually be assets for generating local electricity. And ground source heat pumps are an incredibly effective way of using parks and lakes and green spaces to generate electricity that can either be used to make the park more sustainable, or, as they're looking at in Scotland on a project there, actually selling energy to adjoining buildings and facilities. So this was a way that actually you could try and generate some income for parks, but without actually destroying the heritage and the importance of that park. And looking at this, we also thought about archaeology and how you can do it involving communities as well. So this is just sort of an example of some of the forward thinking that we've been really keen to support. And another one is around foundations. And some of you may be aware there are now a few park foundations around. They're very common in America, less so in this country. But a few years ago we supported the Parks Foundation, which is actually Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole, to develop a model for a Parks Foundation. And these foundations don't take the land off the local authority, they manage the sites with their local authorities, and they're a useful tool to bring in other forms of investment. So their role is not to take on the service of the local authority in managing and providing the revenue service for maintaining sites, but it's to add value. So their interests are in running cafes and facilities and activities, running volunteer programs, and applying for funding. And several of these projects have been very successful in getting funding. The Parks Foundation, for example, has just had a large grant from DEFRA under its Green Challenge Fund, which the Parks Department probably wouldn't have been successful in, but the foundation managed to gain that money. So it's worth having a look at foundations as a model that can run very well alongside a local authority park service. And this is one that I'm sure you'll have all heard of, because I get lots of people asking me about this, Urban Green Newcastle. This was a project that we worked on a few years ago when Newcastle City Council was one of the first councils to announce it was slashing its parks budget by 81%. In Newcastle, the model that the council developed with some business development support and support from the National Trust was to explore creating a trust that would then manage the green spaces on behalf of the council. So the council have basically given this trust an endowment sum which steps down over about a 7-year period, and Urban Green Newcastle have developed a business plan which shows that over a 10-year period they should become self-sustaining as an organisation. And what's great is that the organisation is separate from the council. So again, they've also been successful in winning funding from DEFRA in partnership with Northumberland Wildlife Trust, but it means that they are completely focused on managing parks. That is their sole job. Their budgets are ring-fenced, and they're supporting local people to manage parks locally. So again, it's a model. It's not for everyone, and I wouldn't suggest that everyone should be going down this route, but it's an interesting project to look at. And again, worth having a Google and checking out what they're up to. But for us, going back to that idea of how we used to invest is, grants for single parks, there are a lot of things changing in the world that we need to start thinking about, what I've called drivers for change. Polly's already talked a lot about climate change and loss of biodiversity. And if you're talking to funders, if you're talking to central government, 2030 species targets are absolutely at the front of everybody's minds, as are climate change targets. That's where the money will be going. That's what it's going to be. One of our priorities is around focusing on how we can help nature to recover. So that's where funding may well be shifting to in the future. And I think the clever thing is if you can look at how you align your funding with what's happening in the wild world, as pretty much as Polly was just talking about. And then we've talked, Polly actually mentioned verges, and this is a project we supported called Magnificent Meadows. We have a huge amount of work to do to bring people with us, and I was fascinated by this headline here. Rewilding Horsham Park, a mad idea. Amid fears long grass could house lots of insects. We have a massive job here to change perception. And the number of people who say to me, oh, well, we can just leave the grass along in the parks and it'll all be fine. You will all know that's not how you create a meadow. There is a lot of work that needs to be done to create quality habitats in quality parks. And that's an area, again, there will be a lot of focus with money coming from DEFRA, potentially through things like the spending review. And these are areas that you need to be thinking very broadly about looking forwards. And parks, I mentioned parks are important for protest. Parks, lots of Black Lives Matter protests took place in parks, and parks absolutely key in addressing the whole issue of inclusion and diversity. I think within the Heritage Fund, we talked about parks as social infrastructure. So we have green infrastructure, but we also have social infrastructure. The challenge for us is how do you deliver these social goods when you're just focused on trying to keep the park maintained and tidy? Because our research shows that activities in parks and activating people in parks takes resource, it takes rangers, it takes wardens, and somehow that needs to be funded. But there is more work to be done on how we demonstrate the importance of some of this. And COVID has really driven this. And again, we've already talked about National Audit Office statistics that show the importance of addressing places where there is deficit. We have also been doing some work through our Future Parks programme to map green space deficits across the UK. Well, we're trying to do it across the UK. We're struggling with data in Northern Ireland and Wales at the moment. But some of the cities on here, and in the Midlands, they've got Sandwell, Birmingham, Coventry, Leicester, Nottingham. They're all places where our data is showing there are real issues with green space deficits. So taking Ian's point, it's not just the quantity, but also quality will be important. And this will be driving some of the work that we're hoping to do soon in relation to our Future Parks programme, we'll talk more about in a moment, and a discussion we've got coming up with our board. I'll just skip over that. Oop. And people are critical, and this is Bournemouth Parks Foundation, the best tool store I've ever seen because they've got so many volunteers now working on the parks. And the foundation are running a really successful volunteering programme. And that's people being supported to volunteer, not parks just being given to volunteers to look after. And I think that's, again, a really important difference. I was wary to show you this slide, but this is the truth of what's happening at the moment. This is grant awards to parks projects across the UK since 2010. Here, this is where we had our parks programme. The parks programme finished, and as you can see, we've got a massive drop-off in the number of awards that have been made to parks projects. So yes, we have a problem that we are still open to funding parks and urban green space. We haven't stopped funding parks and urban green space, but I think we've had a communication problem. Yes, we stopped the programme, but all of these things can be funded through our general open programmes. So this afternoon there's going to be a workshop focused on how you can access funding, and we're really keen that we need to shift this graph. We have support at our board level agree funding urban green space is incredibly important, but we need to find out how we can support you to apply to get those projects coming forward in the future. One of the ways that we're trying to support is through our Future Parks Accelerator programme. And this has been a really interesting project, and this is going back to the shift from funding a single site to how we could be more strategic in how we work. And we launched this a couple of years ago. Within the Midlands, you've got Nottingham, Cambridgeshire and Peterborough, and Birmingham are participating. We've got 7 projects on the go. They're all due to finish in around March next year. And these are looking at supporting these local authorities to come up with a vision for their local green space. So thinking beyond the single parks, but thinking about green space right across those cities. How could that green space be delivering more social benefit? How could it be delivering for the environment, the economy, and for climate change? So it's much more, it's a programme that's giving space, support, and hopefully expertise to help these places rethink how they manage, fund green spaces in the future. It's been a really interesting programme. I remember going to one of the first cohort meetings where we started talking about what we were aspiring to do, and one of the managers coming back saying, he recognised now that he's running a health service. He's not running a park service, he's running a health service. And that's the kind of way that we're trying to think here. We're supported in this by the National Trust, who brought a huge amount of their expertise into the programme, and some funding as well from MHCLG. This is basically the concept behind it. I think actually, in moving forward, we're probably going to drop the name parks, I think, in future, because this isn't just about parks, it's about urban green space. But basically, this is about place transformation. Am I all right time-wise? Yep, fine. And the boxes here, we're talking about public benefit, so we're talking about how can we improve the way communities access these spaces. We're talking about strategic value, health and well-being a key one of those. Financial sustainability, so we're looking at what other new income streams might there be available to support these places, mindful of the fact a lot of these parks have got heritage and historic value, so how can that be done sensitively and in collaboration with local communities? And also looking at the whole leadership and capability. And we've developed a cohort of projects that we hope will be able to support and talk about this way of working. And certainly we've already brought the cohort together and had meetings with Polly and others in both DEFRA and Department of Levelling Up. And so, really interesting piece of work. We've still got quite a lot more work to do, and we're now thinking about how we can take this work forward in the future. We also put a proposition to government. So again, Polly asking there about how much money is needed. Well, we did a piece of work with the cohort, with the National Trust, and with a brilliant consultancy called Vivid Economics. And we actually pitched to number 10 last August. We said, upgrading key existing parks and green spaces needs a 1.1 billion investment. We said green neighbourhoods needs 0.4 million investment. Creating large-scale regional parks, forests on the urban fringe, so this is wild belts around city, 2.5 billion. So we presented this to government and said, this is a way that we could actually start answering some of the questions you were asking earlier about green space resource and how it's funded. I think we always knew, we're in austerity, this is going to be a challenge, but we've definitely got traction with this. We've had conversations. So, I think potentially there is work here. We know what it costs. We know what needs to be done. We just need to start moving things forward. And there are definitely chinks of light that we're seeing now, which is fantastic. There's a link to the report in the PowerPoint, so you can read that. So looking ahead for the Heritage Fund, my last slide, we have land and nature as a continuing priority in our current strategic funding framework, which runs till 2024. So if you're going to apply, now is the time to be applying. As an organisation, we're going to continue to do what we can to advocate for the value of parks and urban and green blue spaces. Bear in mind, Cave Space had a staff of 12. I have a staff of 1. So there's only so much we can do, which is why we need to be working in partnership and working with all of you to make our voices clear. But certainly, we're definitely getting more people listening within DEFRA, within MHCLG, within Department of Health, and within DCMS as well, which is fantastic. And those that are involved in the Parks Action Group will know, we spent a lot of time trying to achieve some of this stuff, but actually, I think some people are now beginning to listen, which is fantastic. We're really keen to work with new partners. The National Trust does have a role in all of this. It has some brilliant expertise, and it is really willing to share. DEFRA, because of the issue about species and climate, DEFRA are really keen on working in the urban environment, and that's something I've not seen before. So the recent Green Recovery Challenge Fund grants, several of those came to urban projects, and there's one in Leicestershire, for example, as well. So definite move and a shift in priority there. And also it's important that parks pursue other funding. So Levelling Up Fund, Shared Prosperity, towns funds. It's all about how we make the things that we want to do around parks and green space appeal to these new pots of funding and make them relevant. We will be doing some more work around our own parks accelerator. We want to embed the learning that we've had from that. We're planning a conference in spring next year, and we're really keen to get those that have been working on the Future Parks work from the local authorities to talk to other local authorities about their experience in that. And there's been a massive amount of learning, some brilliant, some stuff we thought, well, we won't do that, we'll do something different. There was a lot of learning, so keep your eyes peeled for that conference next year. And it will probably be brilliant at some point if Midlands Parks Forum got Nottingham, Peterborough and Birmingham to all come and talk about the work that they've been doing. And we're looking at rolling that out in other areas. So we're looking at some work in the north, looking at work in Northern Ireland, and potentially some more work in London as well. And then lastly is just to encourage you to think about applications for funding. So yes, demand is high, demand is always high for our funding. But if you're focusing on projects that are delivering land and nature, they're a priority. If you're focusing on inclusion, that's a priority. If you focus on climate change, that's a priority. So there are a lot of things going in favour of funding green urban space projects at the moment. So try to get to see the presentation or the workshop this afternoon. And as I say, last slide of things, my contact details. Email me if you have questions or you want to be put in touch with somebody. So thank you very much.
I'll put Drew in the cupboard now.
Just go over it.
Any questions for Drew?
Excellent, great.
There's one at the back. There's one at the back.
Ian Baggins again, sorry. I've worked on excellent projects since '96, 25 years, and to see the slide where you show it at almost at the lowest point ever is just so disheartening. But if you look at I don't find it surprising. The unpublished work with APSI, 190 million cuts of revenue budgets to local authority park services since the last state UK parks. 32% frontline staffing cuts, 41% staffing cuts. I think part of the issue is nobody's got any money or any staff to make the application in the first place, and I think it's whether we turn it round and actually try and start investing in some capacity within local authorities, targeted at levelling up, targeted those areas that haven't come forward, and try and do it in a different way.
I was really keen to show you that graph because I only got that data this week and I was quite shocked by it as well. I'm really keen that we look at how we can improve this, and this isn't just in the Midlands, this is a UK-wide issue. We have the same problem everywhere. There have been one or two successful, so I know, I don't know if Eddie's here, but I know Nottingham, I think you're working on an application at the moment. We've had more success in Peterborough. We do, we need to find ways of supporting people to put good applications together. I think being able to have supported Midlands Parks Forum to develop the forum and enabled you to do the research that you've done recently is incredibly helpful. But I'm really keen now that we try and start those conversations with our engagement teams to look at, well, how could we build that capacity? What are the barriers to applying? And particularly thinking about that spatial deficit, the areas that we need to target funding. And I think Ian knows, but when Cave Space were in existence, we did some work with them to look at the local authorities that we'd funded and how the places we funded related to deprivation. And we've done fairly well in getting funding to those places that are most deprived. But I think the thing that concerns me is that the places that are least engaged with parks are probably those that have got the most deprived communities, and that the places that we need to target that funding. So yeah, really keen to carry on that conversation and to try and link up that conversation with Midlands Parks Forum and also our own engagement teams to see if there are ways that we could try and help with that. So totally agree, Ian. And part of the reason for showing that graph was to inspire people to apply, because the money exists, we just need those applications.
Any more questions? We've got time for one more. Gentleman just here.
I just wonder where cemeteries fit in all of this, where sometimes there's a conflict between the social value and the spiritual value of the site, which places more limitations on what you can do there.
Well, cemeteries are part of heritage, obviously, an incredibly wealthy resource of heritage. I actually got the cemeteries put into our parks programme because we were aware, and talking to Historic England, of the desperate state of many of our really important historic cemeteries. And as a result of that, I think we've got about 9 cemetery projects that are in delivery at the moment. But I think there are some really good examples now of how cemeteries can actually work really well with local communities, delivering all the benefits that parks do. I don't see a huge difference. Interesting, I was going to mention this to Jane. The Landscape Institute has just announced the finalists for the Heritage and Culture Award, of which there are 4 projects, all happen to be heritage funded, and one of those is a cemetery project. And they're, really good examples there of how that project has brought together local communities. It's engaged in teaching people about biodiversity, it's teaching people about composting, but it's also teaching people about the history of who lies in that cemetery, the social history. So I think there are fantastic things, and we have got some really good examples of cemetery projects now that are really worth looking up. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Drew.
Thank you. Thanks very much.